My name's Mark Solana. I'm a local Savannah, Georgia businessman, and my son, actually I have four children. Gray is the third of the four. Gray was born in the year 2000, the second of my children to be born with a heart condition called prolonged or long QT syndrome. And what that is, Wesley, that's the way your brain tells your heart to beat. Without getting too technical, it basically can cause the chambers of your heart, the timing of the squeezing of the heart's chambers can be a little bit off. So when the heart starts beating rapidly, it can get confused, and then it can basically just start quivering and not getting blood to your extremities, and that's when problems start. And that's what happened. That's what happened with Gray, the unthinkable. We really hoped that would never happen, but it did. This was the weekend before his birthday in 2015. He was about to turn 15 years old, and I had gone out for a day with his two older brothers that came home from college. Before guys went out, we went out to the Forest City Gun Club to go shoot a little skeet, and came back home. We had gone to Dick's Sporting Goods so Gray could look for some birthday presents, give some people some ideas, and then we went home. Everybody went off to their own room. And I was in the den, and my wife had fixed a nice supper for everybody, and we called Gray to the table and we didn't get an answer. So after calling him, 3 or 4 times, getting a little aggravated with it, we went down the hall and started looking for him and got a little panic because we couldn't find him. And then we looked in the hall bathroom, or at least my second son looked in the hall bathroom, and Gray was passed out on the floor. And we called 911. We started doing CPR. Did everything we could do. Obviously, a lot of prayer in those moments. The ambulance came. He went in the back of the ambulance. His brain had been starved for oxygen, excuse me, for about 8 minutes. But I have a neighbor who's a cardiologist. He got his heart started again, and he was taken to Memorial, taken to Memorial Hospital and their pediatric unit, and we tried to revive him for 36 hours, and but he was just, his brain was so damaged at that point, so oxygen starved, that his vital organs just wouldn't work. And so they called in a team of surgeons, and we had to let him go, and we donated his organs. It was very sudden and very shocking, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But that's life. Life can be long and drawn out, or life can be short and stop quickly. None of us ever really knows when our last moment is going to be. I could walk out the front door here and get hit by lightning or hit by a train or a truck or whatever. So I think it's just very important that we're all ready when that time comes. And I thank God Almighty, Lord, thank you that Gray was a believer, as my entire family is. But Gray was a believer. He believed that Jesus Christ died for his sins, and I have no doubt that Gray is in heaven right now. So that's one reason I really wanted to become involved with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, because Gray was a good athlete. He was a good boy. He was a good kid. He wasn't perfect. He'd be hard-headed, but we have a lot of wonderful memories. He was, like I said, he was a good athlete, though. We just had to watch him, knowing that he had a heart condition. But he was cleared by his doctor to do stuff, and he loved it. He loved playing basketball, flag football. He couldn't play full contact. We tried to get him to, his older brother tried to get him to play golf. He goes, no, that's not even a real sport. But whatever he did, he was committed. He was into. and that goes for his faith. When he was, we're Methodists, and when we went to confirmation back in 2014, he was confirmed as a member of the church. We don't, Methodists are sprinklers, but he had already been sprinkled. But as a part of confirmation, our pastor asked if anybody would like to be immersed in the Skidaway River, and he said, "Daddy, I absolutely want to do that." And this was in February when they were immersed. It was in late February. The water was cold. The gnats were out. There were about 6 or 7 of these kids that did it out of 30. And but he wanted to do that. He had a strong, quiet faith, a strong, quiet way about him. And I'm fully invested and aware of his whereabouts right now. He's a lot better off than any of us are. Shortly after, after the funeral, I started, obviously there's a lot of feelings here and a lot of shock you have to work through, but I wanted to think of ways that I could protect and grow his legacy. And the Lord has been such a strong part of who he was that I wanted to make sure we could connect the two, his legacy with Jesus. Find a way to glorify Christ through the whole process. And it just came to me, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was somewhat familiar with the organization. We weren't involved with it. I don't think there was, the chapter was very big or very strong or well known in Savannah at the time. But I went ahead and called Brad Lane, the regional director, and Brad came down. I told him what I was trying to do, and he said, "Well, let's just explore that. Let me take you to lunch." So we went to lunch. We sat down. I told him Gray's story, our family's story, and then I told him, that I would like to see. Gray was, number one, he was a believer. He was a Christian. Number two, he was an athlete. Boy, loved basketball. He loved anything to do with Georgia football. He was just a sports nut. He loved sports and he loved his Lord. Those are two naturals to me. They tie together for who Gray was personally. And what can we do, Brad? If you got any ideas. And after we continued to talk about it, talk through lunch, I did a lot of the talking. But Brad blew me away at the end of the lunch meeting, and he said, "Well, I tell you what," he said, "sounds like your son was a fine young man. He was an exemplary young man, and I want to name our local Camp Scholarship Fund after him." And of course, I almost fell out of my chair because I knew that was a legacy statement. I knew that would strengthen, obviously, forever my bond with FCA, our family's bonds with FCA. But more importantly, it would just people would want to know who Gray was. Who was this kid? And I would just want to tell each and every one of them that he was a Christian. He was a believer in Jesus Christ. And I cannot tell you, from a parent's perspective, how much comfort that gives you to know that your child is in heaven right now. If you were to exit this world immediately, who is going to be left in the wake? Who is going to be left wondering about you and your eternal destiny? How are you going to leave those people? I can tell you what, Gray left us in a great way, in a wonderful way. And I want the same thing for everybody else. Well, it's not like we all want to have another disease we got to worry about. But this is a real one. And I remember when my oldest child's 24, when he was born with this, 24, 25 years ago, he presented with this 6 months, when they were doing a 6-month ultrasound on my wife. He had an erratic heartbeat. This is one reason I'd like to see this be a standard procedure for newborns, is to do an EKG. But anyway, his heart rate would go from 150 beats up to 180, and then drop back to 140, and then go up to 200. And the tech obviously did not like the way that looked. So she called in the pediatrician. He didn't like it either. He called a specialist. At the time, we were living in Beaufort, South Carolina. He called a specialist up at Medical University of South Carolina, and he said, well, just don't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it right now. Just wait till the child's born, and we'll check him then. Well, when Joe came into this world, they immediately hooked him up to leads, ran an EKG on him, and it looked like a lie detector test. I mean, he was all over the map. He was fibrillating, which means his heart muscles were squeezing here. Now this one's squeezing 2-3 times. He was all over the map. Blood was, thank God, it got to his organs. But anyway, he was life-starred to MUSC, and they put him on beta blockers, which is a very common medication. And that straightened him right out. He's been on beta blockers his whole life. So the medication, once you know you have long QT syndrome, the medication and lifestyle control is really about all there is to it. You have to watch the sports that you play, and you got to get checked periodically. But the dangerous thing about long QT syndrome is now they believe 1 in 3,000 people have it. Back then it was 1 in 20. This is more prevalent now than childhood leukemia. And people, young people, you hear about young people that go out and play basketball or football, and then they just drop, and nobody really knew why. Well, it could be that they have this long QT syndrome, and the terrifying thing about it is the only symptoms are fainting spells. If you have fainting spells, sudden onset of fainting spells in your family, if your child has it or relatives have it, this is a genetic problem, so it could be a familial problem. You could have somebody who's 40 years old who has long QT syndrome who is at risk, who may have had fainting spells in the past, but just didn't perish from them. So anyway, long QT syndrome is definitely, it's a threat. It's a serious problem. And if you have any questions about it, there's an organization called Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndromes.com or SADS.com. It's a very interesting website. All these problems that I'm talking about, long QT syndrome, there's Brugada syndrome, Timothy syndrome. These are electrical. These are all, that's how your brain tells your heart to beat. If your brain doesn't tell your heart to beat properly, then you get out and start moving around, bad things could happen. So anyway, if there's any fainting, anything like that in your family, if you feel lightheaded after young people, if y'all running wind sprints or your football, basketball practice, whatever it is, if you get lightheaded, feel like you're going to faint, don't blow that off. Coaches, don't blow that off. That could be a real serious issue, potentially lethal. My son had something called sodium channel long QT syndrome, which strikes people more randomly. Most athletes, young athletes who are stricken with this suddenly, have what's known as potassium channel long QT syndrome. It hits you when you're out being mobile. So anyway, I don't want to see this disease claim anybody else, if that's at all possible. So I want to get the word out to athletes and families of athletes and anybody who's having fainting spells. In Savannah, next year, we're still putting this together. For the past 2 years, we have had a 9th grade basketball tournament at St. Andrew's School called the Round Ball Rumble, the Grace Solana Memorial Round Ball Rumble. But it falls at the time of year that's just kind of hard for people to get to the tournament. And I think, last year it was not as well attended as the first year. So in order to get awareness growing, I'd like to see this tournament become a middle school tournament. So we're looking at doing that, having maybe 8 schools to start out with. It should be pretty big next year. Probably just be, SPAL and maybe church, not church league, but just, SPAL tournament with local private high schools, private middle schools, rather. And that'll be a fundraiser and an awareness campaign for SADS. So every year, please look out for the Round Ball Rumble. SADS and FCA will be beneficiaries. And thank you very much.